I'm the Executive Director of the Association of Professional Schools of International Affairs. We are delighted to have teamed up with Women in Government Relations for this webinar on best practices in identifying, selecting, applying to, and paying for mid-career degree programs. Our moderator will be Kathleen Colombe, who is a member of WGR, just as soon as we can get the tech side to function properly. But I am excited to have two great presenters here with us. Taryn Faulkner of the University of Maryland School of Public Policy and Nell Barkowiak. How'd I do, Nell?
That was good. Good job.
Okay. From the Maxwell School at Syracuse University. We will go through a quick presentation outlining some different questions you can ask yourself and some key things to be aware of. And then we'll take all of your questions at the end. If you do have questions as we go through, please feel free to type them in this chat box that you see, and we'll take everything at the end. And again, we'll be sure to activate Kathleen's microphone so she can share some of her brilliant WGR wisdom with you at that time. This presentation is being recorded, and so we'll be able to share that link with you. We'll also be able to make the slides available at the end. And so with that, I will turn the floor over to Nell. Nell, you have the ability, using the arrows at the bottom right-hand part of your screen, to advance the slides. But if you need me to, just say next, and I'll be happy to move that along. So again, thank you. Welcome, everyone, on behalf of Women in Government Relations and the Association of Professional Schools of International Affairs. And in the interest of time, we'll jump right in and continue to work on some of the tech issues. But feel free to contact me through the chat box if you need it. Again, this is Carmen Mazzara from APSIA. Thanks. Nell, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Carmen. So let's see, I'm going to go ahead and advance to the next slide. So first of all, I'm delighted to join you all. I mentioned to Carmen earlier that I'm an alum of an APSIA school. I actually completed my Master of International Affairs degree at Columbia University, but for the last 15 plus years, I've been working with the Maxwell School up at Syracuse. And so I'm happy to talk to you all today. And particularly for those of you mid-career who are considering perhaps going back to school and considering options for training or executive degrees, I think that there are different questions that you might have than for those of us who went to grad school immediately after completing our undergraduate degree, or maybe for those of you who are looking to get a second degree. And so those questions that you want to ask yourself are perhaps more practical than they were earlier in your life. You know, for a part-time or a full-time program, you have to be able to carve out at least, say, 10 to 20 hours a week for class, homework, group assignments. And so you need to consider when you have that extra time. Is this something that you would be doing full-time? Or perhaps you would have to carve that time out during the evenings and the weekends. In addition, you have to consider whether your current work schedule or commitments you have at home is something that's consistent, or is there a lot of uncertainty surrounding your time commitments? For example, many of us have jobs that require a lot of travel. And so is that something that you do regularly, and how might that impact your ability to pursue a program if you want to do that while working? Another difficult sort of practical consideration for those of you who are exploring mid-career programs is, you know, many of you have a difficult time saying no, right? You're very engaged in work, in life, you have lots of volunteer commitments. This is a significant investment of your time, and so you may have to consider what you're willing to give up for that period of time that you would be exploring a graduate program. So perhaps there are volunteer commitments you need to rethink. Perhaps if you have young children, you need to consider childcare options. Do you have a spouse or a partner who needs to be involved in this decision? So those are things that you need to consider from a practical standpoint. But then there's those questions of necessity, right? I think if you're on this webinar this morning, you may feel that not having an advanced degree in the field is limiting your options or your ambitions to pursue professionally. Maybe you feel that there is increasing competition, or maybe you feel that you lack some core skills or competencies to remain relevant in a changing field. Or, you know, as you consider the evolution of your professional career, you know, many of us are expecting to work, you know, 40 plus years. You may feel like, okay, I'm at a point now where, you know, I've done this, maybe I'm not getting the same level of professional satisfaction, or maybe I want to shift into a new sector or a new field. Those are great reasons to consider pursuing advanced study. I think as you consider these questions, your answers might influence what type of program you pursue. And I know that Taryn and I may talk about this a bit further, but you know, there are lots of different options. There are full-time residential options. There are full-time or part-time condensed options for executive programs that offer opportunities to take courses in the evenings or on the weekends. There are now a lot of really quality programs that are offered online, either through asynchronous recorded lectures or hybrid models that include a synchronous live classroom session over a video conference like what we're doing right now. So there's a lot of key questions that you need to consider before you even decide to go. The next thing you'll want to take into consideration is the amount of time that you need to prepare for this decision. So much of this time is not really time that you actually need to complete the application process. That's not a substantial burden per se, but this is a significant investment of time and money. And so it's helpful to take some time to consider your options and the implications of those choices. Again, this isn't necessarily driven by schools' deadlines. Many of our schools offer rolling review of applications. Many of our schools have multiple start dates per year. Traditionally, that's in the fall, the spring, and also possibly in the summer, but there are also several schools that run on quarter terms and have regular reviews. So you should consider all of this as you prepare your application, and we'll go through specifically what that would involve. I think another couple important questions that you want to ask yourself when you're considering what program makes the most sense for you is certainly the field of the degree. The Association of Professional Schools of International Affairs certainly includes degrees in international relations and global leadership, but also public policy, public management, public administration. So you need to understand the intricacies of those different degree programs, what the curriculum looks like, what the course offerings are. You also want to consider the flexibility. Many of you who are in the middle of your career have a substantial amount of experience, and perhaps you don't need some of those core requirements that are in the traditional degrees. Maybe you're looking for, you know, a much deeper understanding of the material. Maybe you want more flexibility in your program to, you know, fill in some of those gaps that you have in your knowledge base. Or maybe if you are looking to shift, use the degree to shift, maybe you do want that prescriptive set of offerings where you can walk through sort of the core requirements in the degree. I think one of the key things you need to consider is a traditional degree versus an executive degree. So in terms of the experience and are you qualified for an executive degree, I would say generally speaking, a traditional degree program, usually students come in with at least 2 to 5 years of experience, although we do have many students who go right in from undergrad. For executive degrees or those catering toward mid-career professionals, typically you're looking at experience requirements of at least 5 to 7 years, some are 8 to 10. But really they're looking for you to be able to show progressively greater levels of responsibility, particularly in management or positions of leadership. So we're looking for individuals who can demonstrate experience managing, you know, teams of people or a variety of different stakeholders, maybe managing budgets or allocating resources, or maybe managing an organization through a difficult change, like you had to um, help your organization through a new strategic planning process or something like that. So that type of substantial responsibility is typically what programs at the mid-career level are looking for. As I mentioned previously, also the curriculum can be very different for those programs. And again, the type of instruction and environment is something that you need to consider. And also certainly where it's located, how much it costs, and what types of opportunities it would help you get to. So those are all important considerations. I'm going to turn the next slide over to Taryn to take over.
Okay, like Nell said, it doesn't take 12 months to do your applications, but the more prepared you are, the faster that application process when the time comes will be. And your homework is important. Keep that spreadsheet that Nell mentioned is very important. So now's your research time. And as an admissions representative, I definitely recommend that you spend some time talking to people like Nell, people like me. A good place to do that is at graduate fairs, and Idealist runs a series around the country of fairs. There's a very large one in DC, and you get to talk to, in DC, probably several hundred schools in one evening if you're so inclined. But it's a great time to talk to people and also get your questions answered without a lot of searching on the internet. It mentions on the slide about prerequisite courses and skills. These programs will have some background, especially like a public policy program. You'll need some background in quantitative work like statistics and economics. So if you haven't done that, even if they're not required specifically by an institution, it's a good foundation. And so if you don't have that from an undergraduate program, then I highly recommend that you get those while you're preparing. And you can do it inexpensively at a local community college. You'll get the foundation that you need without spending a lot of money. Weaknesses in your application. If there are weaknesses, you probably will know what those are. So I would work on identifying them and overcoming them. And one of those could be that the lack of quantitative coursework or a weakness in quantitative coursework. So again, take a look at what your program of interest requires and make sure you fill those gaps in your application. Standardized tests are not required for all mid-career programs. So again, do your research, and you can identify those programs that don't require things like the GRE exam. That means if the program isn't requiring the GRE, the rest of your application is really important, and that means your resume as a mid-career person. They're going to be looking closely at your work preparation and what you're bringing to the classroom to share with other mid-career professionals. And then you, as it says, begin to gather your application materials. And at this point, I'm going to repeat about the spreadsheet. If you keep track, you don't have to keep it in your head. So start your spreadsheet as soon as you start your research process, so you can identify the programs that are a good fit for you among all the programs out there and the ones that you think you might want to attend. So I'm going to go ahead and advance. And so we're in the 21st century, and I haven't met a program that doesn't have an online application anymore, and hopefully I never will. So the application form is going to include this online application, and you are going to have to create accounts for each of these applications. And again, this is something to put on your spreadsheet. Record your password, record the login link so that you can just go to your computer, click, work on the application. and access materials that you need to find easily without having to reset your password. Application fees can add up, so that's something, you're going to be working on a budget for graduate school. Work on a budget for your application fee. Find out what they are. It doesn't hurt to talk to a program to see if there's some kind of waiver of an application fee. Some do it, some aren't able to do it. The CV and resume is, as a mid-career person, one of the most important components of your application. It shows your advancement in your career, and again, it shows what you're going to be bringing to the classroom. Official transcripts from each institution. The word official gets debated in admissions directors meetings I attend probably every year when we talk about the new application cycle. So find out what that means. And typically programs try to make it easy for you to apply so that you don't have to request transcripts from every institution, multiple transcripts from every institution that you've attended. Normally you can take that one official copy that you have and upload it in your application. And if you're offered admission and decide to enroll in a program, you usually then would request a single official copy to be sent directly from your previous institution to your new institution. Again, the standardized test scores that I mentioned, do your homework and research to find out if the GRE is required. If it is, give yourself time to prepare for that. For different people, that may mean taking a prep course, others using the book, or some other form of preparation, but you want to make sure you have time, that you're not rushing it. You're working, you have to fit prep into your work schedule already, and it's kind of a good gauge as to how you'll budget your time when you are in grad school by preparing for the GRE exam. Some programs have a minimum GPA requirement for a waiver. Others, especially some executive programs, do not require a GRE score or the GMAT. Your statement and your supplemental essays, again, give yourself time for those, because it's overwhelming to sit down within a day or two of a deadline and have to crank out these statements. And you'll be thinking as you go along, if you write an outline, check what the program's asking. Most of them let you start an application and you don't have to submit it till you're prepared with your essay and who your references will be, but it gives you a chance to look at the essay, find out what the questions are, and then write, in stages, do an outline, go back when you're fresh, take a look at it again, see if you're presenting yourself in the best light possible. For a program that doesn't require an interview, this is pretty much your only opportunity to present yourself the way you want to be presented. So that essay is an important component. Your letters of recommendation, the slide says 2 to 3. Check the requirements for the programs. Normally they try to limit the recommendation letters for mid-career people because they know you're busy and they understand getting recommendations is time consuming for both you and for the writer of your letter. So again, check the requirements. A personal observation, submitting more than what is required isn't necessarily a benefit to your application. They tend to be repetitive. You want to find the best references you possibly can get for that number that is requested. Bank statements for financial aid is not for all programs. Some schools, especially private schools, do their own loans, and they will request those statements. Other institutions, like public institutions, loans are handled through a central office, and you would submit your FAFSA and follow the directions after that goes in and find out what the school will need from you through that. So 6 months out. Your list of programs hopefully was pretty long when you started, and you've met with people in person, by phone, at career fairs, and you've kind of narrowed down what you want to apply to. You want to make it a reasonable number because you're going to be doing a lot of work yourself. You're going to be asking references to write a lot of letters for you. And there's the cost of application to keep in mind. And talking about the recommenders, this is a stage where, especially the early career applicants, you can really tell who's put time into cultivating the references versus those who just asked a few people to write a letter on their behalf. You don't want to be approaching people who are going to say the same thing about you. If a program asks for 3 recommendations, you want to find people that can talk about 3 different aspects of you and your fit for the program that you're looking at. So I highly recommend that when you approach a recommender, you have a folder that includes information you want them to keep in mind when they're writing the letter. If they ask you for a draft letter, write it and write it well, because it could very well be what they tweak a little bit, sign their name, and send in. So make sure you are putting your best foot forward if they ask for a draft. But even if they're not asking for a draft, you want to give them the information that they need to write these letters, because a good reference is going to spend a lot of time crafting a really good letter on your behalf. Your resume, again, mid-career, resume is important, and you want to update it before you submit it so that you have your most recent work experience. Because keep in mind, these deadlines are usually months in advance of the start of the program. And later on, they're going to be looking at your application for things like scholarships and fellowships. And you want to make sure that when you submit that resume, it is the most current one that you have. Again, keep working on your statements. The transcripts, like I mentioned, research what the school requires. You may not need to have multiple copies of that transcript. You may only need one that you then upload, but you want one for each school that you've taken a class at and earned college credits. Some programs may have limits, only place you to earn 9 credits, but that's usually in the fine print, so you want to get everything and then upload what you need to upload. We'll talk more about paying for graduate school, but now's the time to look at your finances. If you are leaving the workforce, you want to start budgeting right away so that you can limit your borrowing and still keep a roof over your head, feed yourself, and pay for school. Outside scholarships, you can apply to them. You should at least be researching them at this point, and don't only look for the big things, because there are a lot of several $100 scholarships that you wouldn't say no to somebody who hands you $500. So don't not apply to scholarships. And there are some, especially for women, returning to school. There's some funding available at institutions. You should just start Googling, and you'll find places that have created master lists of available fellowships and scholarships. And then if you've prepared for the GRE or the GMAT and you didn't get the score that you had hoped for, then take a look at your weakness, and you may want to retake it. And if there is one part of that GRE that is you're substantially weaker on, you can't just take the quantitative part, but you'll have to retake the whole thing. But if you already have a strength in the verbal part of the GRE, don't focus on that prep. We usually practice our strengths. This is the time to practice your weaknesses and get better. So you want to focus on the part that you didn't do as well on and improve that score. And you might want to check with institutions to find out what they look at. Do they look at the most recent scores, or do they take the highest scores? I think you'll find that many will give you the benefit of the doubt and take your highest score in a standardized test. And here's some do's and don'ts. I won't go into too many details, and I'm going to start with the negative on don't ask your family or friends to write a letter that will say, Mary is a fabulous person, she's my cousin, because right away you know that that's going to be not the kind of professional recommendation that we're looking for. And the slide says don't make stupid mistakes, and you can define them as you so choose, but what they are typically is when, and you should write an essay that is targeted to the school that you are currently applying to with that essay. So don't say, I really want to go to the Maxwell School when you're applying to the University of Maryland School of Public Policy. We understand that people are applying to multiple schools. We understand that mistakes happen, but if you are careless about something like that, it's a blemish on your application. And you might want to also subtly remind your reference, who has gone to great trouble to customize their letter about that program, to maybe double check the letter too, because I've seen a few of those from references, and I know the reference means well, but again, it's an unnecessary blemish. And then in the do column, I think I've gone over a lot of those. Prepare early, choose your references carefully, give instructions, not just instructions, but written in a folder instructions. Honest and direct language in your essay, not just your ability to think clearly and critically, but it's your story and you want to tell it well. And then don't hesitate to reach out to the admissions staff and any of the programs that you're looking at and ask them questions. And now we're 3 months out. Again, you should have done a lot of this already. Your essays, this is when you want to be finalizing them. Your recommenders, you've asked them several months ago. They might have forgotten. You want to remind them of what the deadlines are. You want to check to see if this is still a good time in their life to be writing these references. You're always going to be financially planning for an investment like this. Graduate school is a big investment, but it's an investment in you, and you've already determined that it's worth it. And keep looking for scholarships, not just outside, but you want to, at 3 months out, you want to look at the programs you're applying to and find out what opportunities they have for helping you pay for school.
So with that, thanks, Taryn. This is Carmen. I can pick up the next couple slides. As a reminder to folks, if you do have questions, feel free to type them as we go along, and we can take all of those at the end. I think my colleagues have covered a lot of this, but since we get so many questions about what makes an effective essay and personal statement, we wanted to propose some questions that you can ask yourself and craft into your narrative to talk about the journey you've been on so far. So we usually suggest that folks begin with where they were. What are your work and volunteer and life experiences that have led you to this point in your career that you're ready to be thinking about a mid-career program? And what is it about all of that past experience that informs who you are today, why you want to study this particular program, why you want to take this mid-career degree now as opposed to 5 years from now, 2 years ago? What is it about this distinct moment in time in your professional development that puts you in the place of wanting to apply? And that's why all of those questions that Nell outlined early on can be critically important to making a strong essay and personal statement. And then, of course, comes the leverage piece. What do you want to be doing? How is this mid-career program a springboard, and that program specifically, into what you want to do with the degree once you have it? This school, this program, all those pieces that Taryn talked about, being careful that you're really talking about the Maxwell School when you're applying to the Maxwell School compared to the University of Maryland, that help inform the committee about your own goals and how you want to springboard into something else using this particular degree program. So showing where you were, who you are, and who you want to be can be a way to craft that whole long narrative that really is distinct to you and helps you put forward a really clear perspective on what you want and how you can bring that into this program. So I'm sure that Taryn and Nell have lots of stories about every similar essay that they've read that all starts with the same quote from Margaret Mead or Malala Yousafzai or whomever. But this composing your essays in this way is really distinct only to you. So it will help you stand out because you're able to show and take the committee on this journey with you. Our colleagues have been saying all along that the process doesn't have to be 12 months, but you can do it as a great way to do research. I have the happy task of showing you where the rubber meets the road. Now is really the time to finalize all of those pieces you've been working on and put together that strong application for admission and those strong applications for financial aid. There are sometimes the same deadline or different deadlines. So as Taryn said, you have to be careful and track all of these pieces. Now is the time to check in with your recommenders. People get busy, people have lives technically outside of work and school and helping you. So be sure that everything is turned in by the right deadline and that everything that has been requested gets submitted. It's a scary time to click that submit button on your application, but it's a good time because it's the product of all of 12 months of discernment and research and conversation and writing that you've been doing, and hopefully that great springboard into the future of what's next. As Taryn said, there are some common mistakes that can be avoided if we're careful and keep track of things. I think one of the most common is just simply failing to follow instructions. If the application asks for 3 letters of recommendation, don't send 2, don't send 5, send the 3 that they asked for. We also often encourage folks to ask, if they can, for extra copies of external documents or different pieces, so that if you contact a school and say, I want to make sure you got this piece, and the school says, what are you talking about? You have it ready and it's there so that you don't have to go back and request things or ask again for a transcript or a letter or some piece that's easily attainable. We've called them stupid mistakes, we've called them dumb mistakes. Hopefully you won't call them mistakes at all, but we encourage you to have someone else read through your essays, read all of those pieces that you're putting together and understand what you're putting forward. Not only to help avoid things like putting the Syracuse application in the folder for Maryland, but also making sure that you put forward the projection of you that you want the committee to see, and that as you tell that story and talk about that journey, it really comes forward the way you want it to. And lastly, of course, is that self-assessment and that honest discernment that you've been doing. Be sure that you can talk about what it is you want to master and why. If you had hiccups in your academic career, or there have been different parts of your own professional journey, be sure that you put those forward in a clear, straightforward way. They can be actual assets as you talk about struggles you've overcome and are able to bring into the classroom to really contribute to a broader conversation about that particular subject. If you're not sure where the line is between oversharing and putting issues forward, as we've tried to hopefully convey to you all, reach out to the schools, talk to them, help get a sense of where there's a gap or an issue and where it's just way too much information. So they can help you maybe navigate that line between putting forward good things and just TMI. Lastly, of course, is the fact that even once the application is submitted, unfortunately, your work isn't done. We encourage you to continue to learn about programs because we hope that you'll get accepted to lots and lots of different schools and you'll still have to pick between them. So continue to learn, continue to talk to alum or talk to staff to figure out what the best place is for you. As I'm sure you all know, we have this in here just because it's always a good reminder to thank the people who wrote your letters of recommendation so that they can continue to be allies for you and in your network. We also, as I said, want to make sure that everything you think you sent has been received. I know that after the application deadline, it's a crazy time for schools, but just make sure you check that everything you think you turned in, they have. And unfortunately, the financial planning piece also doesn't end when the deadline is passed. You need to continue to work on that financial plan, continue to save, continue to understand what the impact of this degree program is going to be on your financial resources and on life as you've grown accustomed to it. So all of that, unfortunately, continues to happen after the deadline and before you've enrolled in the program. So Taryn, one of the questions that we often hear is, what is it that schools look for? Can you share a little bit more about that?
Yes, I can. And what we look for is your will you succeed in our program? We know what our courses are. We know from experience, students lacking certain preparation will not succeed in some of those courses. So your academic record is important. If, as Carmen mentioned, sometimes there is a blip, and you do want to explain why that's a blip and not a pattern. So if there is an academic deficiency, address it and talk about the steps you took to compensate for them. If it was you didn't do well in quantitative courses, and you need that skill to succeed in a program, talk about what you've done to overcome that, which hopefully will be taking more and doing better in those courses. Getting tutoring sometimes is one of the things. So we look for, will you succeed academically? We look for, what will you contribute to the classroom? What experiences do you bring? It may be a lengthy work career with a lot of accomplishments. It may be a personal story that's very compelling. It may be a clear motivation for that particular program. So we're looking for what you're bringing to the classroom, and we're also looking at every other student in that classroom so that it's a dynamic environment that you'll be learning with other accomplished individuals. We are looking for a diversity of opinions, backgrounds, race, gender. We want a lively discussion environment, because in these types of degree programs, you're grappling with a lot of society's problems. So we want to hear from multiple perspectives about those problems. And it's, it can be really enlightening when you hear from another individual a perspective that you had just never even been aware of. So that's what we're also trying to put together in a classroom. And we are looking for people that are committed to the program, that will get good jobs when they leave and come back and help nurture the next group of students coming through. So we're looking for people that will be accomplished alumni and hopefully engaged alumni.
That's great. Now, I think one of the questions that folks are often wrestling with is how do I make school affordable? How do I pay for school? Do you have any wisdom to share in that regard?
I mean, I can try. This is certainly not an easy decision, as Taryn and I have both said previously. This is a huge investment. So there's lots of different resources that could be available to you based on the school and the degree program and your specific position. Most schools will offer either merit and or need-based aid. So some schools have positions that are allocated for students who are particularly exemplary and they would like to try to encourage to attend. And others offer funding available for students on a demonstrated need basis. However, I would say that for executive degree programs, the menu of options on merit and need-based, and also this next category of research and teaching assistant positions is very different than in a traditional degree program. So that can be trickier to navigate for students in mid-career programs. I think in traditional residential degrees, oftentimes you could try to negotiate, working as a graduate assistant with a professor to help them with research or teaching. That may be available for mid-career programs as well. And I think you'd need to, talk to the program directly about whether those opportunities are available. Occasionally those come with tuition benefits or other stipends or other support. In addition, I think it's important to consider what opportunities are available outside the individual department or program. Occasionally, there are opportunities within the broader central university. They may have agreements with external funding organizations, or they may have central support. And if you fit that profile, that may be something that you want to consider pursuing. And of course, also external sources of funding. I would say that for those of you who are exploring going to graduate school and are mid-career, the key considerations are what the true cost of attendance for the program is. So when you're looking at the cost, don't look at just the tuition and fees and books, etc., but also consider your time and energy. So this is a different calculation than somebody coming right out of undergrad. There's going to be an opportunity cost for lost income. There may be a relocation cost. Could you leverage getting credit for your experience? If you consider, a traditional degree program in this field could be, say, 40 credits. Mid-career versions of the same degree are generally fewer credits, 30 credits. So in effect, you're getting a 10 credit discount for your experience potentially. So you need to consider, are schools going to give me credit for my experience or not? Again, you should also not just consider the tuition rate per credit, but how many credits you're going to need to complete the degree. You should also definitely consider what employer support may be available. In the program that I work with, we have probably 40% of our students are receiving some form of support from their employer. If you can't negotiate tuition benefits with your employer, consider negotiating flex time or the ability to take a leave to complete your program more efficiently. Also, in terms of loans, right? Eventually, many students are going to rely on loans to help cover some of their costs. And you need to be aware that loans for graduate study are very different than loans for undergraduate study. And for those of us who are, decades out from that calculation, you should take some time thinking about what those are. So if you're a US citizen who's eligible for federal educational loans, typically at the graduate level, you can get up to $20,500 per year in federal unsubsidized loans for graduate study. That's usually at about a 6% interest rate. And then in addition to that, there's federal direct graduate plus loans, which are a little bit higher, 7% rate. So you need to talk to somebody in the financial aid office to explore what the implications of those are. It's tricky to do a cost benefit analysis for something like this, but I would encourage you to think about it, right? So for those of you who are perhaps working for the federal government, the GS scale actually will value a master's degree by, I think, at least 2 grades above those with a bachelor's. And if you consider that over, say, a 20-year career, that's like, I think, for between step 1 and step 10, it's like $8,000 or $10,000. If you consider that over, a 20-year career, that's like $150,000, $200,000. Of course, that varies across sectors, right? But you have to realize this is an investment. You may have a 40, 50-year career, so that's something that will pay off over the course of your career. So just keep that in mind.
And
Thanks,
can
Nell.
I add one thing too? Is research scholarships. I can't tell you how many times funding, either it's an award that people apply to and only a small percentage of people apply for that funding, or it's funding that almost no one applies for, so you're almost guaranteed. Don't, a $500, $300 award may cover your books and other expenses for a whole semester or even a whole year. So look for that extra funding. It's worth your time invested in trying to find it.
Thanks, Sharon. That's absolutely great advice. So in the interest of time, I want to just touch very briefly, as the Association for Professional Schools focused on international affairs, I'm sure you all are very much aware of all of the different disciplines that come together and fields that an IR degree can prepare you for. So particularly those of you who are in government relations, there's a growing emphasis obviously on the ability to work with governments, outside of the United States, a growing set of relations as global companies try to operate within the United States. So training within the many different fields of international affairs can be very beneficial, particularly with a GR focus. But I won't spend a lot of time on that, except to say we would be delighted to welcome all of you into the APSIA family. And as you go forward, there are a number of different resources at your disposal. And as I said, we're happy to share these slides afterwards, but here's Nell and Taryn's and my information. Taryn mentioned the value of interpersonal contact at graduate school fairs. APSIA runs events online and around the world throughout the year, and you can find them all at our link, apsia.org/events. We have some fellowship and scholarship information focused on mid-career and a lot of it for traditional programs on our fellowships and scholarships page. As you begin the discernment process, we outline a number of all of our member and affiliated graduate school programs. And as you think about the many different things you can do with these sorts of degrees, we have an international career guide as well. Before I turn it over to Q&A, I also wanted to remind you all that as you're considering your next steps educationally, there's the resources that Women in Government Relations, or WGR, provides as a resource. It could be trying to choose graduate school, certificate work, or professional development. WGR can be really helpful as they offer substantive programming in a variety of different aspects. From leadership training to issue area expertise to personal advancement, they are here to support your career development. And one particular opportunity that they are offering is the Direct Connect to Congress series with Judy Schneider. So if you've ever wanted to learn or brush up on all of the intricate processes at the House and the Senate and committees, this series would be for you. And you can check out their website, which I will happily post into the chat box right now, if my computer will behave, in order to be sure that you all can take advantage of all of the different great things that they provide. And that you can find all of that information at wgr.org. We've been very proud to collaborate with them on this webinar, and we wish all of you the best as you try to choose the next step that's right for you. And so ask us your questions. Let us see what it is that we can do to help you figure out what's right for you. I see one great question in there from Nancy, but one place I wanted to start with is a question I was asked in a different WGR session I did, which is, Taryn and Nell, why would someone who has all of these years of experience think about getting a degree? What is it the degree grants that someone with just years of experience may not necessarily have? Taryn, do you want to start?
Sure. They're increasing numbers of opportunities that not having a master's degree, this is pretty straightforward, makes you not qualified for that position. You know, you may have the work experience that qualifies you, but if you look at the description of the opportunity, it may say required a master's degree. So for that, that's one simple reason, but really straightforward reason for getting the master's degree.
Yeah, this is Nell. I'll just add to that. I mean, beyond just having an advanced degree as a credential, I would say, you know, I see a lot of candidates who come into our executive programs already having an advanced degree in another field, and they may have sort of advanced in their career to a position where they, maybe it was outside of the field in which they earned their prior graduate credential, and they're feeling perhaps that they don't have the deep understanding of the complexity of being in a management position or being held to account as a leader without the capacity to understand how to effectively serve in that role. Alternatively, they may feel like the field has evolved enough that they need to broaden their knowledge base in areas that are new to the field. You know, for example, in the field of public administration, there's lots of collaborative governance issues and different methods of budgeting, which if you know, studied it 20 or 30 years ago, you wouldn't have been exposed to those. So I think those are the other things we see beyond just people who are looking to switch into a new sector or field.
That's great. And for folks who've graduated 20 or in the case of our questioner 35 years ago, and so don't have a recent academic record, how important do you all find a 35-year-old transcript when looking at an application, or do they need to justify not having something more recent?
I don't
Nell?
think, oh, no, go ahead.
Go ahead, Taryn.
Okay, because I've been thinking about this one. I don't think don't focus on the 35-year-old transcript so much as what is that program requiring and what might be lacking from your 35-year-old transcript to show that you're qualified for the program. So, and what have you done between earning your bachelor's degree or whatever that 35-year-old degree is, and as Nell mentioned, what is currently required for the program. So don't focus so much on the, I have this 35-year-old degree and it's not worth anything, in the application. You want to talk about what you've done to be currently qualified for the program. And if there was a deficiency, and I've seen this in our executive program where an individual didn't do very well in a bachelor's degree and has gone on to a very accomplished career and is now seeking a master's degree for some personal reason to them, that what they've done leading people, managing budgets, especially large government budgets, and their successes along the way. Use that to demonstrate your current fitness for a program, and if there was a deficiency from a long time ago, show how you performed in the intervening years.
Yeah, I think I'll just add on, generally we need to review the transcript regardless of how old it is to provide some evidence of academic achievement. It gives us a sense of how you might do in an academic environment at the graduate level. But I can say that the further out it is, the less credence our committee members give to it. But if your academic record shows if there's any weaknesses in it, those need to be addressed directly. You can't just say, well, it was 35 years ago, right? You have to say sort of what the circumstances were, how those have been addressed, how they're no longer relevant, and certainly, focusing on the experience that you've had in the interim.
So another question I often hear as folks debate mid-career degrees is about talking to their current employer about the fact that they're thinking of going back to school, partially because of the trade-offs that Nell mentioned, and partially because they may need a letter of recommendation from a supervisor or a boss. Do either of you, and Nell, we'll start with you, have any advice for folks as they try to broach that conversation?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I would tell you that if you plan to pursue the graduate degree while you're still maintaining employment with your current employer, it's good to engage them in the process of pursuing, considering whether or not this is something that it makes sense for you to pursue, because you're going to need them on your team when you're negotiating how to make this work in terms of maybe flexible work schedule, or maybe you want to engage them in some of the requirements. Many of the executive degrees offer capstone. Maybe that could be something that you could collaborate with in terms of developing a project with your employer, for example. Certainly it's helpful to have them engaged if they're going to be offering any support toward the program. But I can also understand if you feel like you want this to be a decision that you make completely separate from the commitment that you have with your existing employer. And so, I have seen applications from candidates where perhaps they're soliciting letters of recommendation from folks who have worked with them very closely, but are not their direct supervisor, for example. So, you know, it's a fine line to make, but I would say if you anticipate doing this and continuing your position, you should try to engage them in the process early on.
Great answer, I think. Now, and I'd also acknowledge, you touched on this, acknowledge to the employer that even the flex schedule is a work benefit, and it's something that the employer is offering to you outside of direct tuition assistance. It's trickier when you are, especially if you're a mid-career professional, that you've made up your mind to leave the workforce for a period of time. Hopefully, I've seen some fabulous recommendation letters from supervisors that clearly have been informed that the person is leaving their job to pursue a master's degree or other graduate degree, that they, and the employer is supportive. It's always a really positive experience when you've let the supervisor in on your decision. And I would like to touch this, not directly in answer to the question, but a lot of people will pursue a degree because they've decided to re-career, change directions. And that might be a little bit more awkward. It depends on your relationship with the employer. And sometimes people want to keep their job, to keep that income for a period of time. But do keep in mind that if you are pursuing an advanced degree because you want to pursue a different career path, that at some point you're probably going to have to leave the workforce so that you can get internship and work experience in your new direction. So that's something else to keep in mind when you're doing your planning.
Thank you both. With that, we are at time. So if anyone has any last-minute, extremely pressing questions, type quickly. Otherwise, you can see Nell and Taryn and my email here on the screen. You can also see the website for WGR in your chat box. And on behalf of WGR and APSIA, I want to thank all of you for being a part of this Continuing Your Education webinar. I believe it's Continuing Education Month at WGR, so please be sure to check out all of the great activities that they have and have had in the past. Be sure also, if you're looking to build out your knowledge, that you think about the resources they provide, like the Direct Connect to Congress series. We also hope that you'll join us at an APSIA event in the future to get some of that great FaceTime and resources with the folks like Taryn and Nell, whose job it is to help provide you the best advice they can as you ask yourself these important but difficult questions. With that, I'm going to close it out. Again, we will have the slides and a recording available shortly, and we look forward to seeing you at a future APSIA and WGR event. Thank you very much, everyone.